Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic is a prince on two continents, rhinos of Asia and Africa, presented by our fabulous expedition leaders, Aditya Panda and Rich de Gouveia. I'm your host, Sunny Vanderstar. Thanks so much for showing up today, guys, and giving us your wonderful presentation. I'm going to go ahead and turn it right over to Aditya.
Thank you, Sunny. Hello, everyone. I'm Aditya Panda. I am NatHab's India expedition leader, and I've been leading with NatHab since 2016. Richard, you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Eddie. Hi, guys. I'm Richard. For those of you who don't know us, we've done a couple of these webinars. I do trips throughout Africa, and I have been guiding with NatHab for going on 7 years now, almost 8 years. And we're really excited to do a different topic today, one that's pretty close to both our hearts with regards to conservation and everything. We're going to be talking about rhinos and rhinos on different continents, and we're going to start with their evolution. And rhino evolution has been very interesting. Basically, they were a very diverse and abundant family, and were for a long period the largest terrestrial mammals on all of the northern continents. And these, the earliest known, were found in North America and resembled basically like tapirs and horses, and had no horns. And they developed these horns much later on and were generally a lot smaller, but they basically they were broken down into three different groupings as they came along. There were running rhinos that were adapted for speed. They ranged in size from a small dog all the way through to mega giraffe size. Then going to aquatic, then there was a different family called aquatic rhinos. These were incredibly successful across North America and Eurasia. But around 37 million years ago, they went through a tough time. There was a major decline, leaving only one species around 30 million years ago that was close to a hippo. And then bringing us to the family, the Rhinocerontidae, which are the forebearers or the forefathers of today's rhinos. They first appeared around 40 million years ago, and were the earliest species, were small in size, and then they grew larger as time went on. It was a large extinction around 37 million years ago. However, there were a lot of them that survived because of the diversity of their environment, of their diets, and how they had adapted to these diets. So in Asia, rhinos appeared around 37 million years ago. And there was one specific family called the Indraceretus, which was the largest known mammal on the planet. It grew over 19 feet tall and 30 foot long. This is the guy right over here that you can see against what it would be a massive elephant bull and what I would suggest would be a normal sized human. But I mean, look how big that thing is. It's absolutely crazy, and would have weighed over 20,000 tons. That's 44,000 pounds. Crazy, crazy, crazy. And they ate leaves from trees and grasses and different things. But Asia was basically the home of all these rhinos. And I'm going to let Eddie tell us a bit about the rhinos that are found in Asia.
That's awesome, Richard. That giraffe-like rhino was amazing. It's like an Asian elephant standing on an African elephant to reach shoulder height of that animal. Yeah. So in Asia, we have 3 rhino species, and the best known of these 3 is what is now called the Indian rhinoceros. That's sort of a misnomer because while that is appropriate for today's day and age, India actually had all 3 of these rhinoceroses at some point of time. The rhinoceroses that we see on NatHab expeditions to India or Nepal are what are called the greater one-horned rhinoceros. These are, along with the African white rhino, some of the largest rhinos around. And besides the greater one-horned rhinoceros, we had the lesser one-horned rhinoceros, which is now called the Jarvan Rhino. And Richard, if we can go back to the map showing the distribution of these three rhinos, you can see how the Jarvan rhino and the only two-horned rhino species that is found in Asia, the Sumatran rhino, kind of shared their range from the northeastern parts of India through all of Southeast Asia and even parts of modern-day Eastern China. But of course, their ranges are now drastically reduced, and they're found in little pockets in Indonesia and Borneo. And the Indian rhino, the greater one-horned rhino, is doing much better and is found, there are about 3,600 of them around that are found in the alluvial floodplains in the foothills of the Himalaya and Nepal and India.
Now, tell me, Eddie, how do these guys survive up there? I mean, I'm used to rhinos in warmth and lowland stuff, and even as far as deserts. How do rhinos actually survive along the edge of the Himalayas, where it gets so cold and altitude and all the rest of it?
Well, the areas where rhinos are found along the Himalaya are below the foothills. So these are basically lowland plains kind of areas, very tropical. You see, the Himalayas, they serve as a wall against the cold winds from Central Asia. And that's what gives northern India a tropical climate, because otherwise, India would have much cooler temperatures, for the latitude it is at. And the Himalayas sort of serve as the wall from Game of Thrones, keeping the cold winds out. And the foothills have a lot of Himalayan rivers and rivulets that sort of flow down into the plains and form these amazing, very rich alluvial floodplains that have these grassland and marshy habitats with different kinds of forest from region to region, which are perfect rhino habitat.
And how do you get around those areas when you're on safari there? What vehicles are you using to get around, and how do the rhinos actually react to you being around them?
Well, most of our drives are in a typical safari jeep, and the rhinos are pretty okay with that. They don't like us to get too close. They can get pretty aggressive if you do that, but viewing is excellent. And given the fact that Kaziranga National Park, where we watch them in India, is home to 70% of those 3,600 rhinos that are around today, our chances of seeing them are excellent plus. Also, interestingly, we do go out on elephant back as well. So, typically our first sort of excursion into Kaziranga is on elephant back, which gives us the opportunity to leave the roads and go into the tall elephant grass, and we can get really close to rhinos. They really don't mind the elephants much at all, and it's a very interesting experience because you have a number of elephants going in, and these elephants travel like a wild elephant herd. You have got a number of elephants and there are calves running around, so it's almost as if there's an elephant herd that would naturally normally be roaming around in those grasslands, and you just happen to be on them, which gives you the most up close and personal experience possible with rhinos.
That's very cool, because in South Africa it's quite interesting. I mean, I'll pull up this photo here where we've got this little one climbing on top of Mom, and it was having the best day of its life. But the white rhinos generally are pretty relaxed with the animals or with the vehicles being around. But black rhinos, this sort of sighting here, this is a black rhino, actually is very difficult to get this close because they're normally quite skittish. And their habitats vary quite drastically because of the fact that their diet is so different. So a white rhino is a complete grazer. It has this very square lip. So they tend to be in more open areas, out in beautiful spaces where they can get a lot of grass, where your black rhinos generally live in denser vegetation because they're complete browsers. They've got this little hook lip that's on the front there. And their distribution around Africa has changed a lot over time. As you can see by all of this depiction, and even what you were saying there, Addy, the areas that are circled were the previous ranges of these animals. The areas that are colored in, so here, this little dot over here on the edge is the only spot where you're going to find Jarvan rhinos. At least white rhinos and black rhinos have a little bit more space, but everyone else is under incredible pressure. And even that's being said, this area has become smaller and smaller because of poaching, because of a lot of habitat intrusion by humans and relocation. So the places that they live are quite different. Our white rhinos are quite sociable, and what we find, and especially as the numbers grew, because the southern white rhino was actually written off as extinct in the early or late 1800s, said there were none left. They've been poached to extinction. And then a group of about 50 animals were found in a park called Shishlui in Folosi. It's based just around these little purple dots over here. And they were the base of all southern white rhinos on the planet. 50 individuals to well over 20,000 individuals. And since then, we've had a major decline, which we'll talk about later. What's the sociability like on the fact of the one-horned rhino in India, Addy?
Well, the male rhinos are usually solitary, and a female with a calf is about as social as they get. But around wallows, these rhinos, the Asian rhinos, and that's a question I have for you, whether African rhinos wallow as much as, but Asian rhinos love to wallow. And at these wallows and at salt licks, you can often find rhinos coming together. Of course, you can watch a number of rhinos grazing on, on a single grassland, but they kind of keep their distance from each other.
Yeah, ours do definitely wallow. I mean, the wallowing, that thick skin, the amount of ticks and different parasites that they get on the skin is vitally important. To do that mud rolling, to keep cool, to look after that skin of theirs, and there's a lot of sociability though in the white rhinos as the populations grew. As I said, like in Kruger National Park, they reintroduced rhinos in the 1960s. They put a few in first, and then added another 20 and another few. And their population skyrocketed to over 12,000 individuals just because there was space. It was as if somebody had said to them, "You've got space, go." And they just went nuts. For 50 years, they just made babies everywhere, just making babies. So the sociability, as these numbers grew, so we started seeing more of the sociability, more of the herding that would happen, and groups of animals sticking together. The most I saw in one group was 23 white rhinos in a group. What's the most you've seen at a wallow?
You see about 8 or 10 at the most. But do these groups interact, Richard? Like, say, is there any kind of social structure to them? Anything close to, say, ungulates or elephant?
I wouldn't say a firm. There's no firm social structure like an elephant, but there is a lot of interaction. So youngsters will stick together, mom and calf together. She'll protect against the males. Same as the one-horned rhino. The male is territorial, so he'll form this boundary. He'll look after it, and there's this amazing interaction because different males will obviously have their territory set around, Now, one male may have his territory set up, but he doesn't have any water in it, because our dry season, our winter period is our dry season. A lot of the water systems disappear. So he'd have to walk into another male's territory. And there's this very ritualistic thing where he'll put his head down, he'll show submission, he'll walk in, he'll be allowed to come and have a drink, have his drink and move back. Or if the males meet on a territorial boundary, instead of just beating each other up and having 5,000 pounds worth of rhino with a sharp, pointy thing stuck to its head, batting heads with one another, they'll actually come together and touch horns and then move apart and then touch horns again and then move apart. This very ritualistic back and forth. So there's more to that social society on that sociable side of them than we know. But unfortunately, because of very little data, because of poaching, because of low numbers, we haven't really been able to put our finger on the pulse of what's exactly happening on that. How do your males interact with one another in terms of that territoriality?
They do get into fights, and that's a question I was about to ask you. Is that whether the African rhinos, do they use their horns as daggers when they fight?
Very much. So this is a black rhino again. See the hook lip, and we'll show a picture a little bit better when we're in the diet. But the males, I'll recount a story that we had on the one reserve where I worked. There was a young adolescent that was at the age of needing to move on, and a male rhino came in and basically tried to push her away from her mother so that he could get into mate. And she got caught and she got stabbed under the legs, in the neck, in all different places. And for the most part, when we're out in the bush, in nature, we try and leave things to nature. So if something like that happens, you let nature take its course. But because of the fact that rhino poaching was where it was at, we put the money out, we got a vet out, we darted the rhino, we put her down, we cleaned out the wounds, we cleaned out the maggots, we even put tar, black top tar for roads inside there to block anything from getting inside there, and cleaned the wounds out and everything. It was an amazing success. She was well on the way to doing things, and unfortunately lions caught her right before the summer season where she would have built up her strength and gone on. So yes, fights do happen, and they are very violent when they do occur.
That's interesting, because the Indian rhinos don't really use their horns as weapons. They
Really?
are, yeah, they do a lot of biting, and you'll see, like this black rhino here, you'll see a lot of Indian rhinos with a lot of wounds on their scars and wounds on their skin, and like these oxpeckers here, you'll often see myna birds coming and actually feeding off the wound, or probably picking up maggots from it. But most of these result from bites and not the horns.
This is actually a different type of wound. This one that you see on the side here is actually caused by a specific type of fly that plagues the black rhinos. So black rhinos you can see this one's got the exact same scar on its side here. And these were two young adolescent bulls that were just completely relaxed with the thing. And the oxpeckers here would do the same thing. They parasitize that area, they pick it off, they drink the blood that comes out of it. It helps them in a different way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
So tell me about the diet of your rhinos, Eddie.
Well, the Indian rhino, it's very interesting that you mentioned that the white rhino has a flat lip because it's a grazer, and the black rhino has a hooked upper lip because it's a browser. Now, the Indian rhino, it does have a hooked upper lip, and the hook is sort of prehensile, but these are primarily grazers, and they will eat fallen fruit. This is not an Indian rhino. The next one, this is the Jarvan Rhino. If you can, yeah, the one with the egrets is a good one. The greater one-horned rhinoceros, or the Indian rhinoceros, is primarily a grazer. They will eat fallen leaves and fruit sometimes, and they love aquatic plants a lot. But they still have that prehensile sort of upper lip that they can use as a sort of little trunk to hold grass and pull it. And when they come across very large tufts of grass, tall grass, they'll often just walk over to the grass bush and put both their legs around it and use their body weight to push it down to get to the tasty bits or to get it down to the height of a calf. So that's how the Indian rhino feeds. But the Jarvan and Sumatran rhinos actually have very interesting feeding habits. Now, if we can go to the black and white picture of the Jarvan rhino, you will notice that the Jarvan rhino actually does look very similar to the Indian rhino, except that it's a little smaller. And so the kind of habitat these rhinos occupy today no longer have those large grassy meadows that you find in India where Indian rhino are. And it is believed that the Jarvan rhino was a grazer once upon a time when that kind of habitat existed. Those kind of landscapes existed in their habitats. But now they're primarily browsers. But they're very adaptable. They're considered the most adaptable rhino when it comes to eating. They don't fuss too much about what's on their plate. And so as of now, in their present habitats, they primarily browse and eat leaves and fruit. And we also have the Sumatran rhino, which is at the other end of the food fuss spectrum. These rhinos, they exist in very typical habitats. They exist in highland rainforests as well as lowland rainforests. But in the highland rainforests and cloud forests of Southeast Asia, one would imagine they don't have much access to grazing lands. And these rhinos eat primarily young saplings. So in a way, they're grazing, but they're also browsing, if you know what I mean. Yeah. And they do eat a lot of fruit and leaves like the other rhinos, but a very large proportion of their diet is consists of small saplings, and a very wide variety of them at that.
That's amazing. I just think back to what you're saying about the saplings within these cloud forests and these high altitude forests. You wonder what sort of role they were playing in the greater scheme of things, by eating those saplings, controlling how much is actually getting a chance to grow bigger. I wonder how that's impacted the forests through that. Do you have any idea of that, Eddie?
Well, with less than 80 of them surviving, I don't think they have much of an impact anymore. But yes, elephant, rhino, all these large mega herbivores, they play a big role in making thick forests accessible to so many other smaller creatures. Wherever they walk through or feed through, they form game trails that then opens up thick vegetation to smaller animals, to ungulates and others. So yes, I'm pretty sure the decline of the Sumatran rhino must have had a drastic impact on these cloud forest and highland rainforest habitats of Southeast Asia. But it happened so long ago that I think nobody had a chance to study any of that.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't it? I just find it so sad that we've lost that information before it even became available to us. In Africa, it's funny how the two major species, your white rhino and your black rhino, and it was all a mistranslation of how they got to these things. It's got nothing to do with color. As you can see from these photos here, that's a black rhino who's gray, and there's a white rhino that's gray with a lot of mud on it. So there's got nothing to do with color. It was actually a mistranslation of the word wide, and as you had spoken about, Eddie, the white rhinos have this wide square lip. It's actually now called the square lip rhino for grazing effectively, picking up and tearing off grasses on open plains. And it's amazing to listen to them because you just hear this as they're tearing this grass up. You can sit with them for hours and just listen to the sound. And then
I'm glad you explained.
black, yeah, carry on.
I said, I'm glad you explained this because for years and years, I've been watching African documentaries and trying to see the difference in color between the two rhinos.
So the wide was actually mistranslated to weit in Afrikaans, which means wide. And
Right.
somebody thought weit meant white. So they called it a white rhino. And the opposite on the black rhino, because they're different color spectrums, the Zulu tribe actually called them umfolozi, which means black heart, because they were so dangerous. These things are crazy. It's like they've got worms in their heads. Because they live in such dense habitats, because they're browsing the whole time, they attack to see what's there. So no in-betweens, they just come running at you. So they were seen to have a black heart because it was so dangerous. And then they got called the black rhino. But like I said, they've changed him now to a hook lip and a square lip rhino, which has changed a lot of different things. And effectively, what's amazing with the black rhino is that when it bites down, its dentition actually come down at 45-degree angles. So if you're looking for black rhino dung, it looks like elephant dung, but all the twigs are cut off at a perfect 45-degree angle, each and every single one of them.
Wow. And they pass through just like that? Yeah, I said the dung pellets, when they pass through the alimentary canal, they're still at that 45-degree angle?
Yep, all the way through.
Wow.
It's quite incredible. I mean, even if you look on this, so they're busy eating what is called a euphorbia here, which contains a toxin called a toxin inside it, which has a very bad impact on us. If we were to get it on our lips or our tongue, it would burn us, it would burn our skin. Yet these guys are just chowing away on it as if there's nothing to it. But if you look on these branches, you'll actually see the 45-degree angle over here. And it's even more fun when you're on safari and we get out and we start playing with poop. The guests really love it. They love getting their hands in. And I'm joking, nobody ever loves getting their hands into it except us, the guides. But it's good to see the guests' faces. I don't know how much you play with dung when you're on safari with the guests, Eddie.
Well, not much, and there's a reason behind that. So, number one, it's filthy. Number two, you see, there's this there's this flower called the spider flower, and it's a Cleome, C-L-E-O-M-E species for those with an interest in botany, and it's a South American invasive flower that spread all across North America, Europe, and Asia. And for some reason, rhinos just love to eat these flowers here in India. And you know, as you know, rhinos have these dung piles called middens, which they deposit at the same place again and again. And you can always spot a rhino midden anywhere in Kaziranga, because it'll be beautiful and purple, full of these flowers. So, all of us try to turn our bathrooms into a sort of aesthetic spa-like environment. These rhinos do that with a garden on the poop sites.
Yeah, potpourri. Make it all smell nice when it comes out. That's fascinating. How are the middens used? How do the Indian rhinos or the one-horned rhinos use their middens?
They're communal, but there's also a territorial angle to it. So, like with a lot of other animals, one individual, a competing individual, will try to sort of mark his presence over the presence of another individual by pooping, just by basically using the other guy's loo.
So ours do it The males are responsible for the middens, and they'll go around their territory. As I said earlier, they're territorial, so they'll span their territory out, move along, drop their dung in an area, then kick up the dung and break it up so it covers their feet. So every step they take, they leave a scent trail along the boundary. And then as a sign of respect, all of the other rhinos in the area, if they come to that area, will poop around it. They won't go on top, because it's a direct confrontation that's saying, I want to take over your territory. Let's go, let's have a fight. And that's when those horns will come into play. But it's a major role in making love and making babies, because what happens is the males will come around to their midden and then check all. It's like a Facebook site for everyone else. They'll then come around, look for a female, or sniff around, see, okay, this is a young male, he's got a bit too much testosterone, next time I see him I need to chase him out. Or there'll be a female and then he'll smell that she's in estrus. And it's not just this straightforward thing where he gets there and she goes, cool, hop on. It's an amazing thing to bear witness to rhinos mating, because of the fact that for 2 weeks she will play hard to get. She'll chase him away, like chase him with a horn. She won't want anything to do with him. He then has to stick around and chase away any competition. And then after 2 weeks, she softens to him and says, okay, come on, pull in, you can do this. And then she lets him get closer, but now he needs to try and find a way to put 5,000 pounds onto her back. And he's got these short little legs, so he puts his chin on her back and then levers himself up with the chin and runs onto his back. And then the rest of this happens, which can take a couple of tries in practice before he finds where he's supposed to go. But it's a major event, because when he gets it right, it's a 40-minute affair between white rhinos with multiple ejaculations. And it stems to a lot of the myth around rhino horn having its potency as an aphrodisiac and to be used in these cultures, which has caused so much problem with the poaching. Do your rhinos find the same sort of direction when it comes to that, Eddie?
They do. And after everything you just described, the kind of effort that a male rhino especially has to put into, win the love of a female, you're making me feel really guilty about an incident that had happened with me. It was completely, unintended. So there was this time in Kaziranga when, and you can see the angry face of the rhino down on the right-hand corner of the screen at the screen. We just took a blind turn around a corner in the forest, and just as the jeep turned in, we see a rhino mounting another, and I don't know which part of the 40 minutes they were in, but the moment that happened, the male dismounted, the female ran into cover, and then the male gave us a really dirty look and started walking towards us. And then we had to go in reverse much faster than I can ever remember. So,
but I mean, for all their attempts to mate, and I've already alluded to white rhinos and their ability to come back from that, what was thought to be extinct. What sort of conservation efforts are going on around your side in India, in Asia, to protect these guys? Because at the moment it's a crazy onslaught to get this horn, and it's worth more than gold. So, I mean, what are you guys doing that side?
Well, it's been a very tough fight. Kaziranga, the national park that we go to on the Grand India Wildlife Adventure, has been central to rhino conservation in Asia. It's got a 100-year-old legacy of rhino conservation. It's a long story, but I'll put it quickly. So in 1904, the then Viceroy of India, Lord Curzon, who was based out of Calcutta, because Calcutta used to be the capital of British India at that period. His wife, who happened to be American, I think she was called Mary Curzon. she had heard about this near mythical creature then, and she wished to see some. And so she traveled to Assam, where since the period of the East India Company, a lot of the lowlands of Assam had been cleared to start tea plantations. And so she was visiting one of these tea estates and staying there, and she wished to see a rhino. And the best tracker from the area was put at her service, and they went on elephant back. They looked for days and days, and then the tracker pointed to a rhino, but by the time Lady Curzon had seen it, the animal had vanished, and she did not trust the tracker's sighting. So he actually got down from the elephant and pointed at the rhino's tracks to her. So anyway, she came back very disturbed at the plight of this animal, because by then a rhino, originally the rhino was found all over the Indo-Gangetic plains of India, and by 1904 their numbers were already so low that it was nearly impossible to even see one. The primary reason was the tea estates taking over rhino habitat, and combined, of course, with a lot of hunting. So Lady Curzon came back to Calcutta, insisted that her husband do something about the rhino, and that's how Kaziranga was first protected and made an area where hunting was no longer allowed. And like you said, with the white rhino, the southern white rhino, there were 50 of them. We don't know how many greater one-horned rhinoceros were left, but there were so few that no one could see them. And from that, the number has now climbed back to over 3,000 animals. And our primary conservation measures have been, of course, designating protected areas where rhino habitats exist. And it's nowhere close to the former original range of the rhino, but there are pockets of conservation where rhinos have even been reintroduced from Kaziranga to sort of start new populations. And the most important conservation measure is protection, because these rhinos are, as you said, their horns are worth their weight more than gold. And you and I know that it's only keratin, which is, our fingernails should probably fetch that much money if you go logically by it, and both of us would be very rich people. But there's unfortunately a massive market for this sort of stuff in parts of the world. And rhino poaching is, the poachers are highly driven. They use automatic weapons. A lot of insurgency in parts of Southeast Asia, in countries like Myanmar, which border India, is actually funded by the illegal trade in rhino horns. So you need really military level protection to safeguard a place like Kaziranga. And as you travel in most national parks in India, you'll rarely see armed guards. And the forest guards that you see will usually be armed with a stick and a walkie-talkie, nothing else. But Kaziranga is one place where they're armed to the teeth, and there are regular occasions where Kaziranga guards fight bullet for bullet with armed poachers. But they've been doing a great job of it, because the number of rhino poaching cases have been coming down drastically and are down to single digits every year now. It's always going to be a struggle to keep it at zero, but even single digits is huge progress from what it used to be a few years ago.
That's incredible. I mean, single digits means that would replicate basic natural birth and death rates.
Yeah, probably.
That's very cool. How big or how heavy would a greater one-horn rhino's horn be?
Well, the horn itself isn't too big. If you go back to the picture where we had the rhino with the egrets around it, that's, I think it was in diet. Yeah, this one. That's about as big as an Indian one-horned rhinoceros's horn would get. Most of them are much smaller. If you might have noticed in the other pictures, they're much smaller. So maybe 20-25 centimeters at the most is their length would be. But like with ivory, like with elephant tusks, the market value for rhino horns from Asia is much higher than the market value for rhino horns from Africa. So, the drive to poach them is still just as strong.
How much would a kilo or a pound of horn work out to?
I wouldn't want to put a figure to it. And in India, we've been following a policy where in press releases and in public sort of platforms, no one any longer mentions the market value of seized or destroyed or captured contraband that comes from wildlife, because that figure, those figures have been found to actually drive more poaching and more, a market for that.
Understood. I mean, it's incredible what they're doing around Kaziranga again to fight bullet for bullet with poachers, and unfortunately we're in the same position down here in Africa, because there are so many rhinos here, and unfortunately bribery and corruption is a major part of it. So we're losing around 1,000 rhinos a year just in South Africa, and 70% of Kruger National Park's rhinoceros have disappeared. So from the first time when I started doing safaris in the lodges, we used to go out and you'd see between 10 and 25, maybe 30 rhino in a drive in a 3-hour period. Now we're fighting to see 2 or 3 rhino in an 8-day safari, because they're becoming that much rarer. And we're fortunate with the hidden South African trips. 2 of the lodges that we go to have incredible rhino populations and very strong anti-poaching units and things like that. But still, it goes without saying. There have been a lot of different ploys to do it. So this was one situation where we used to get guests to pay to dart a rhino, and they would be part of the experience. And what would happen is they'd put the rhino down, do some research, and they'd drill holes, and they'd use a high-pressure hose and shove an ectoparasiticide, a cattle dip, into the horn with a dye, like a banknote dies for when people are stealing banknotes and they explode and you can't get them off, and inject that into the horn to make it useless. But unfortunately, nobody from outside. So here's the normal horn, what it would look like. That's what it looks like when it's been dyed. So this guy was darted and covered up afterwards. But once that duct tape falls off, there's nothing to differentiate him from the next rhino. So it was a failed attempt. There was a lot of money that went into it, and people were still using it and killing the rhinos and taking it back. So what we've resorted to now is dehorning of rhinos in order to try and again stop that whole thing. But rhino horns can get huge. Even this front horn on the female here would weigh probably 7 or 8 pounds, which is a big load of money. So if you guys aren't talking about money, I wouldn't talk about money, but it's a bucket load of cash that's sitting still on her, which is it's become problematic. To think that 12,000 rhino are down to about 3,500 rhino in Kruger National Park is quite incredible over a 10-year period.
Do these horns grow back, Richard? Do they have to keep cutting them off? Because keratin, I presume, would grow.
Yeah. So they produce about 2 kilograms of horn a year. So one of the things that people are toying with as a conservation idea is to farm them. So there's one gentleman that has a farm of about 1,000 rhino, and he collects the horn. He cuts the horn off every year, and he then stores it, and he's trying to get it legalized to sell the horn to try and flood the market. But what impact that has down the line, we don't know. And I'd rather err on the side of caution and say not. But it's definitely a part of it. And each rhino's horn will be differently shaped according to whatever the surrounding is, because they actually rub it against things to create that the shape of the horn. So yeah, there's definite use for cutting it off. But like these ones here would have been flat against the skull, and then they've grown up around here. Even the youngster's horn was taken and moved up, and then these horns will be stored in safes again because of their value. They're big vaults that they keep these things in. The horns are microchipped to keep them going, and their conservation is quite dire. Unfortunately, I have witnessed or been witness to 18 different rhinos being poached through my career. Each one was intense. A lot of the time I had to be there, was the first one on site called to the place. So when you're there, you can't but shed a tear. It is the most violent, horrific thing, because it's just, there's no regard for life. It is just about the money. And then to end off, I'm going to play this video. Some of you might have seen or heard me speak about my experience with the northern white rhinos in earlier this year. But I'm going to play this video that we made for WWF and give you a little insight into that, and then we can take some questions after that.
They recovered just a little to around 32. We had the privilege of seeing the last.
Sorry, I'm just going to wait till this thing jumps out of my way. Thank you. Enjoy it.
So I think one of the highlights of my guiding career was going to Old Pajeta Conservancy in Kenya, where we had the privilege of seeing the last two northern white rhinos. These two females are the last two left of an entire subspecies. And this subspecies used to roam everywhere from the northern parts of Uganda through Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo, all the way into Sudan. And these grazers spread from the forest through the grasslands and moved all around. Over years of poaching, numbers in the 70s and 80s went down from 500 individuals to just 15. And from that point, they recovered just a little to around 32 individuals. Now, I had the privilege of taking guests in with Natural Habitat Adventures, and we got to interact with these animals. These last two females are guarded 24/7. To be on the ground with these gigantic creatures who had no ill will towards us, even though we've taken out the rest of their species, was immense. I remember getting back into the vehicle after having this time outside with these two animals and just letting it sink in that I'd just been on foot with the last two remaining individuals of the subspecies of the species, and that there was a high possibility that within a few years, if something drastic wasn't done, that they would never be seen again. You can't explain the emotion, you can only feel it. Whilst the survival of the northern white rhino remains in doubt, and the thought that a lot of people have written them off as extinct because there are only two females left, with the last remaining male having died in 2018. The effort to save these animals seems quite distant, but there's a lot of things that are going on. First, they try to mate one of the northern white rhino females with a southern white rhino, just to try and keep some of that genetics. Unfortunately, it didn't take. The young and the older female have been found to be barren. The older female is unable to take the weight of the baby because of the damage done to her feet from being in a zoo for so long, walking on concrete. And the younger one, through a miscarriage, has actually fallen barren and unable to carry You would think that this would spark the end of the chance of the revival of this northern white rhino species. But scientists are hard at work to try and find a way to do this. What they have done is they have harvested eggs from both the older and the younger female. They have eggs from other females too, and semen from 7 different northern white rhino males, which they have stored and frozen. The eggs were flown all the way to Italy, to a research center where embryos were created from in vitro fertilization, and they are ready to be implanted. But how are they going to implant them? How is this possible? Both of these females are barren. What they have done is they've created and used 2 southern white rhino females who they have separated from the rest of the group. They're going to use these as the surrogate mothers for these 2 rhinos and for the embryos that are to come. Now, where it gets really crazy is us as humans have to figure out when the female is ready. And this is an impossible task. Rhinos have an incredible sense of smell, and they use an organ called the organ of Jacobson to figure out when a rhino female is ready. How this works is when she goes to the loo, he will be able to smell in her dung her age, her sex, her sexual status, her hormone levels. All of that information is stored in there. And when I first heard about it, I was like, how are they going to do this? How are they going to figure out how a male rhino does this? So what they did was they used a sterile white rhino male, southern white rhino male. The moment he breached the point of no return, where he started to try mate with those females, that is the point that they know that she is ready to accept that egg, that embryo, and implant it in. So as soon as COVID eases and those embryos can be flown in from Italy, those females, as soon as they are ready, will be implanted with this and be the surrogate mothers for these incredible creatures. There's a 50% chance of saving the species.
How cool is that, Eddie?
It's amazing. Has that been? Is there a timeline to that? Has it been? It's been done already, right?
No, they're still busy. It literally, in August when we were there, they hadn't had the chance to get the embryos out because of COVID. So I think anytime from now, that'll be happening. There's been a bit of backwards and forwards, but nobody's been implanted yet, as far as I've heard. But fingers crossed that this will all sort of come to a head, and baby northern white rhino will be born, and it'll be on a NatHab trip. When we're there, we get to see this all happen and take photos of the new baby. That would be pretty cool, eh?
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
How many females did you say they have eggs from? Just those 2?
No, there's about 14 females that they have eggs from, that they've harvested them eggs.
So they can build somewhat of a gene pool to start from.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Cool. Are you ready for some questions, Aditya?
Absolutely.
Sunny, hit us.
First of all, I just want to thank you so much for that brilliant presentation. It was a fascinating comparison, and I learned a lot. I already have a ton of questions, so I won't solicit more, but we'll try to get through a couple here. The first one that I'm going to present is, several people brought it up in various different ways, but there's questions about why the Asian rhinos have hair or plated skin versus the African rhinos that seem to have more smooth skin? Is this an evolutionary thing? Are there environmental reasons? Can you just talk a bit about the different skin and texture of the skin?
It's an evolutionary thing. The Indian rhino has this sort of these thick skin folds that almost act as an armor. And before the days of modern rifles and shotguns, the rhino skin was believed to be bulletproof. In the days of the old muzzle loaders. But of course, that skin doesn't protect them from bullets anymore. And the Sumatran rhino is actually it's also called the hairy rhinoceros because it's not the same thing as the woolly rhinoceros that's now extinct, but the Sumatran rhino does have a fair amount of hair on its body, and the Sumatra Rhinoceros is actually the only surviving species of its genus. And let me read out that genus name again. It's difficult to remember. It's called Indraceretus sumatrensis. So the other two are called Rhinoceros unicornis, which is the greater one-horned rhinoceros, and Rhinoceros sondicus, after the Sunda area, of course. So yes, the Sumatran rhino is interesting in that it's got hair on itself.
Yeah, I mean they're just more hairy than what others. All the rhinos have hair. It's a mammalian trait to have hair, but it just is more of a show on it. And there were some rhinos, some hairy rhinos in China, which might have actually been the forebears of the myth of a unicorn because of its hairiness and its one horn that it would have had. There's some thoughts that would have been the case. The other thing is that if we look at something like this black rhino, there will be folds of skin and more folds of skin when it doesn't have as much gas in its tummy. These are all hind gut fermenters, so they've got a first primary stomach, acidic stomach, and then a sac in the cecum which has lots of bacteria, fills with gas, so they're full of gas, and that's why the ripples on the side, so that there's expansion plates or places for it to expand a bit more.
Fascinating. Not what I expected you to say. Next question. As the numbers grow, is there concern about genetic diversity? As they reproduce and the numbers grow, what does that mean for the gene pool?
So effectively, we're stuck. So I'm going to give an extreme account because cheetah are an extreme account of genetic diversity. So on the last ice age, it's believed that cheetah dropped to around 7 individuals. That's the conservative view. The extremist view is that there were 2 individuals, 1 male, 1 female, that were left on the planet. And they've now speciated into 7 subspecies. So they can survive. The problem comes in is if there's any disease or climate change happens too quickly or anything like that, there's very little genetic diversity to move through these. So like Aditya was saying with the one-horned rhinoceros, the greater one-horned, they don't know how many were left when that conservation of Kaziranga took place. We know that it was about 50 individuals of white rhino, of southern white rhino that were left. We know the northern white rhino, if they get it right, will have maybe 20 individuals worth of mixing to get to that point. So it all depends, but it's more a disease thing, and that's the end of the line of the evolution. They won't change very much from where they are.
Got it. Got it. There was one specific question about Kana. Were there massive floods there? Is that being remembered correctly? And did it affect the rhinos in any way?
It's not Kana. Kana is in central India and it's known for tigers. We do go to it on the same trip, but it's Kaziranga. Kaziranga does suffer massive floods. The entire park is located in the floodplains of the Brahmaputra River. So it's very natural that it floods every monsoon. Now the problem comes when there's a highway that goes right next to the park, which separates it from the highlands, the Karbi Anglong hills that line the park on its western side. And the natural thing for most animals in Kaziranga to do during the flood season would be to escape to the hills. And they can't do that as freely as they used to earlier now, because this highway was expanded and it's a multi-lane highway now with a lot of traffic, and that prevents animals from safely being able to leave the flooded park and heading out to the hills. But that is now sort of physically managed very well. There are the animal corridors have been identified, the spots at which animals cross over have been identified, and there are physical patrols in those areas 24/7 during the flood season. And traffic is held up and allowed to go only in crawling convoys. They can't drive faster than 20 kilometers an hour, and they're allowed to pass through only in convoys. And this ensures that as many animals as possible can escape the floods into the hills.
Amazing.
Seriously. Okay, let's see. There's so many great questions, everyone. Okay, would a northern white rhino normally mate with a northern black rhino?
No. So the black rhinos are not distinguished that way. There's one type of black rhino, one species, no subspecies that I know of. Northern white rhino is genetically close enough to mate with another southern white rhino, but the white rhinos and black rhinos are two very different species, and they're even a different genus. So there you have Ceratotherum simum, which is a white rhino, and Diceros bicornis is the black rhino. So they're very different genus to them. They're well split off. So white rhino can't mate with a black rhino.
Okay. I think we have time for one more. Do rhinos have poor eyesight or hearing? Can you talk a little bit about their senses, how they relate to the outside world?
So so rhinos in general, I love it. There's a book that I read my son often, and it's called Why Rhino Has a Baggy Skin. And effectively, it was talking about how rhino had this perfect skin. He had horns on the side of his head, and he was beautiful and everything, but he was very arrogant and egotistical. And one day it got really hot in the bush. So all the animals took off their skins and went and lay in the mud to try and cool down, but Rhino fell asleep. So all the animals thought they're going to get him back for all his egotistical nature, and they started stretching his skin, and one monkey took his horn and then ground it down to a smaller one. And then he came waddling out later. He couldn't see it, had mud in his eyes. They said, no, don't worry, Rhino, we'll help you. And they put his skin back on, and they put the horns on in a different way so that the one horn was in front of the other instead of on the sides of his head. And that's how Rhino got his baggy skin. So rhinos effectively have a vision that will probably be about 30 feet. They can pick up movement from about 100 feet, but I've seen rhinos get a fright from a tree stump that's literally next to them. But their hearing and smell is extremely good, unbelievable. I've had rhinos sniff me out from around half a mile away.
Wow.
Anything to add, Aditya?
Well, there wasn't a better way to answer that question than the story Richard reads his son. I don't know if he cooks these stories up himself, if they're in books, but yes, he's right. Rhinos are a little short-sighted, and when you're on foot in rhino country, that's what can make them very dangerous, especially if you sort of surprise them at a short distance. And of course, they can hear and smell very well. The majority of rhino attacks on humans are as a result of their short-sightedness and as a result of them freaking out on coming too close to people, by not being able to see them early enough.
Excellent. Well, that's all we have time for today. So I'll go ahead and hand it back to you for some closing comments.
Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this webinar on rhinos, and Richard and I are soon going to come up with another topic that we can compare between India and Africa, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
And thank you to all of you for tuning in, but thank you to Aditya for staying up, because it is now 2:30 a.m. in his time. So I really want to thank you for putting in the effort to be here with me. It's 11 p.m. now. It's about 2 hours past my bedtime. But thank you, guys. We really had fun. I hope you've learned a lot. Please book some trips to come see these animals, especially in Africa. We are really in a bad way in their numbers, and if you're going to come see them, don't wait.
And in India too.
Well, I'm glad to hear you're already cooking up another presentation. So many of the listeners have expressed their appreciation, and specifically that the combination of you two is just unbeatable. So thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge with us. And I want to thank everyone else who tuned in as well. Please join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have a replay available on our website soon. With that, I'll conclude the webinar. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day.
Bye, guys.